Thank you, John. And this is a real treat for me to be here. When I taught with John about 13, 14 years ago, our first class, I think, was in Stevenson, and it was not a very pleasant deja vu because that was the room in which I flunked physics as a sophomore.
This lecture, and I thought I'd do a PowerPoint presentation, and this was my first slide. The rest of the presentation had to be blown up, as you might imagine. So, like most of us, or many of us, we assumed that this would be a transition, a brilliant transition from President Obama to Secretary Clinton. You can sort of characterize transitions as either friendly, usually when the same party takes control, or cordial, such as, say, when Obama took over from George W. Bush, to downright hostile, when a president-elect has defeated a sitting president, such as Bill Clinton with H.W. Bush and others. So we were looking for or expecting a friendly transition, and we've got something very different. We don't know how this one is going to go. So like I said, a week ago, we were looking at a Clinton win and actually a very smooth transition because Secretary Clinton would have had the luxury of having an administration in place that she didn't have to blow up overnight. We now have something very different because everyone was wrong. And it is perhaps even a lot of the Trump people were surprised. And certainly they had not developed the kind of pre-election transition planning that would have made this a smooth process. And they're having to learn as they go along. And of course, we're seeing protests around the country that, as well-meaning as they are, it doesn't matter because Trump has won this election. It will not be contested any further. Like 2000, we had an overtime, and we're able to keep that going for 5 weeks until the Supreme Court made its decision. So what we have now is a President Trump. It's an image that not many of us ever expected, but we will live with it, and they will have to do the best they can because now Donald Trump is no longer simply speaking to his natural constituency, which is a lot of people who are just downright angry and upset and distrustful of Washington, media, and so on. He's going to have to be, as he says, the president for all the people, and it's going to be something of a challenge. The two met in the Oval Office last week. There have been a lot of Photoshop versions of this. I would prefer the actual one that happened. The president, I'm not sure what you would read into that look, but I'm sure the meeting was awkward for both of them because President Obama campaigned vigorously against Donald Trump, and Trump called Obama every possible name during the course of the campaign. First, let's have a little bit of history about transitions. When Andrew Jackson, our Tennessee president, he had 3 staffers in the White House. He put his government together by having meetings in the Gatsby Tavern in Washington. John Beecham, who is the ultimate scholar here on Andrew Jackson, can tell you that story, but it was remarkable to me going back to look at how early presidents made their transition into government. Abraham Lincoln had to pay his secretary out of his own pocket. So this thing about monster transitions has evolved over the last few decades. John Kennedy was probably the first president to do extensive pre-election planning. Some of you have read the Richard Neustadt notes to the president-elect or that time Senator Kennedy, which are sort of a Bible for early transition planning. I met with Dick Neustadt in 2000 as we were putting together our own pre-election planning, and much of what he told then Senator Kennedy in 1960, we put in place, and others have done the same thing. Ronald Reagan had arguably one of the most successful transitions, in part because he brought in James Baker, who had been George H.W. Bush's campaign chairman, to be his chief of staff. It was truly a matter of reaching across adversary lines and bringing in a true, experienced manager to put that White House together. And I think it's fair to say that the early Reagan years, the early White House years, were among the most successful we've seen in transition. In '92, we had an extensive pre-election operation running out of Little Rock, Arkansas. But interestingly, the day after the election, the senior campaign team and the Gores and a few of us sitting around the governor's mansion in Little Rock, and the pre-election transition planning team, a distinguished fellow named Mickey Cantor came in with his team and made their presentation, and they were thanked, and then they disappeared. Because overnight, the senior campaign people in the Clinton campaign had decided they were going to do it a different way. And we paid a price for it, because the early months or years of the Clinton White House were certainly chaotic, and in large part, or in part, because we didn't do the job of putting the right people in place during those early days. So let's go back to the future. The presidential transition is really about putting in place a vision of that candidate into government. And most of these people who run for president, I mean, all those 17 Republicans who were running and half a dozen Democrats, they all had in their mind how they would like to govern. And they all saw themselves as being superior to the other guys who were running. And their thoughts about governing generally go pretty far back. People they've known and trusted, or policies that they believe work, or management techniques or things to do or not to do that they experience in observing other presidents. So I would say that for instance, with Bill Clinton, the common lore is that he decided when he was in high school that he was going to become president. So I suspect that throughout his career until he actually became president, he was processing ideas about government. And that included people that he had met along the way, that he trusted, and that he thought would be good partners. I suspect that Donald Trump wasn't really thinking about how he would govern, even as recently as maybe 6 months ago. Now, people around him certainly would have been, but I doubt if he was. And so it'll be interesting to see how this plays going forward. But what he was thinking is this, and I think this would not be unique to Donald Trump. They all think that the old phrase is that each day these people wake up and look in the mirror and they see a president. And probably everyone who comes to Washington as a freshman House member or a senator starts thinking, I can be the president. And they have people around them that encourage that view. They have people who will raise money for them. So it doesn't take much to take that leap. I could be the president. So why would Donald Trump run? There's some who think this really began with the White House Correspondents' Dinner a couple of years ago, when Donald Trump was in the audience and President Obama pretty much eviscerated him from the dais. I don't know how many of you have seen that YouTube of that, but it was brilliant, and it was funny, and it was lighting, and it's pretty clear that Donald Trump did not enjoy it. So there are those who think that he probably thought, damn it, I'm going to run. I'm going to do this. I'm not going to let him get away with it. But once you get nominated, you have to start this process of planning to govern. You've got 2-3 months after your convention, or even earlier when you become the presumptive nominee, for thinking about how are you going to be president if you're elected? how are you going to govern? What kind of people are you going to bring into your administration? And how will that affect the way you're going to campaign? There's a general thought that once a presumptive candidate or presumptive nominee, or much less the nominee, sets in place an organization, a small organization, to start doing this planning, doing the research about what you have to do after you're elected, that you need to push that out. And your campaign people need to not pay attention to this transition. You need to get your candidate elected. So you shouldn't be worrying about when you're going to get this job, or is that person going to get your job, or what office you may get. I doubt if the Trump people were thinking like that. Certainly the Clinton people were, and there was a lot of pushing and shoving in that campaign in the last couple of months of people thinking, what do I want to do in the Clinton White House with the Clinton administration, and it can affect how you do your work. One thing you do during that process as the nominee is you sort of audition people. The staff people you have working for you, your spokespeople, surrogates that are out talking about your campaign, talking you up, and you're sort of assessing whether these are the people that you would want to bring into your administration. And what happens is you begin to elevate the idea of loyalty, perhaps higher than any other factor. Now, you don't want someone who has legal problems. We've seen that in this campaign with Trump. So, but you want people that clearly think you're the best thing going. And that they're going to throw that line, they're not going to make any mistakes, and they're going to say good things, bad things. And looking at these four gentlemen, for the most part, they did that. Now, Christie is sort of taken himself out of the picture, or he was taken out of the picture, but Carson, Gingrich, and Giuliani were pretty effective surrogates. I mean, a lot of us may not have liked what they said or their style, but they toed the line, and they kept Donald Trump's prospects in the front of center. So they win, and they have to govern. Mike Pence, his vice president-elect, is now running this transition. Right after that, once you do that, you have to, once you get your transition started, the first thing you have to do to assure the public that it's all going to be okay is to assure foreign leaders. Now, this is a made-up photograph, of course, but it does say something about that relationship. Apparently, Trump and Putin did finally talk, and apparently they're going to have a wonderful relationship. To put together transition teams, now these are people who essentially volunteer to come in and help you assess what you have to do in these various agencies and these policy groups when you take office. You know, what are the checklists? What kind of legislative things that are coming at you where you have to make decisions? But most importantly, what kind of people do you want running these agencies? And not just the cabinet secretaries, but the people just below them. There are literally 3,000 to 4,000 jobs that have to be filled in the first months of a new administration. And of those 3,000 to 4,000, 500 or 600 of them are incredibly important. You meet with the congressional leaders to sort of let them get to see you again. And Trump had a handful of very hardcore supporters in the Congress, but he also had a lot of detractors. And I'm sure that this is going to be a major focus in this early months to get his relationship straight with especially the Republican leadership. Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell and the others he's going to have to work with if he's going to accomplish anything in the coming year. You appoint your top White House advisors, and the two that we read about this week, the former Republican Committee Chairman Reitz and Stephen O'Bannon. Now, O'Bannon's getting a lot of flack But O'Bannon's appointment as the senior White House strategist sends a message to Trump's, to a constituency of Trump supporters that, yes, this is not going to be an establishment White House. We're going to keep it as all through this administration. And Stephen Bannon, the former head of Breitbart News, will do that. Already we're starting to see a regurgitation of some of O'Bannon's history and some of the Breitbart history. It's quite extraordinary. My guess is that O'Bannon will be the first to leave, because this is not going to go away. His history and that of Breitbart, which worked well during the campaign with Trump's most passionate supporters, is not going to work well with a broader spectrum of people, even within Congress, because Breitbart and O'Bannon have said and written some pretty horrific stuff. You've got to vet these appointments. You've got to do background checks on all of these people, especially the cabinet and the 600 people who are going to actually help you run this government. And it's a very, very complicated process. Time-consuming. The people that are being considered for these jobs have to submit to a deep background check on their finances, their personal history, their relationships. The FBI goes out and talks to their neighbors, their former girlfriends and boyfriends, and college professors, and you name it, to dig up everything they can and then present that to the president to decide who he wants to put in those positions. And a lot of people get knocked out of the process as a result of it. In 1992, the Clintons wanted to appoint an attorney general, a woman who was a judge, Kimball Wood, and then another attorney, Zoe Baird, and both were knocked out of the process because they had failed to pay the taxes on their domestic health. So it doesn't take much. Different groups of appointments, the economic team, the national security team, become absolutely critical to sending a message to the country and abroad of how you're going to govern. What kind of people are you going to put in these jobs, and how are you going to deal with the issues embedded in these positions? Obviously, national security and foreign policy, the State Department of Defense, the Defense Department, Attorney General, National Security Advisor. These are the people who are going to not just help you make decisions, but in the case of Donald Trump and President Mike Pence, they're going to have a huge impact on those decisions, because neither Trump nor Pence had much of a background or any background in national security and foreign policy. And so they're going to have to lean on these people. So when they put in these jobs, they will be absolutely critical, and they have to move quickly. It's a little like, putting on, your running shoes in the middle of a 100-yard dash. You're expected on January 20th, once you're inaugurated, your team is expected to perform at the highest possible level, 0 defects, and you're going to be watched. You're going to be in the front room every day, being hit by the media, by your political opponents, for every mistake you make. In the natural resources area, Trump has said a lot about how we're going to put coal back in the economy, how we're going to start drilling in public land and mining and so on. So he's going to have to deliver on these things, or he's going to have to back away from them. He's got to staff the White House. This was a big mistake we made in 92, 93. We put off the staffing of the White House for 5 weeks during the transition, while the Clintons were trying to decide who they wanted to be the chief of staff. We gathered 3 days in Charlottesville, 3 days before the inauguration, and they introduced the White House staff. So there were about 40 people on risers there for the photographers. And I looked around the rooms, and all of these people had just been identified that morning. Gore named me his incoming chief of staff the day after the election. For 5 weeks, I was the only White House staffer who had been identified. I looked around and I knew a lot of these people. They're wonderful people, but very few of them had ever worked together, and virtually none of them, for us, had ever worked in the White House. So it was a mistake, and President Clinton has said as much in recent years. That was one of his fundamental problems at the beginning. There's going to be a lot of pressure during your transition to take office to reward all these people who helped you during your campaign. The donors, campaign aides, and friends, and so on. And there's a kind of pecking order for the political patronage that comes from being elected president. At the top of this, you have top cabinet appointments. That usually means State Department, Defense, Treasury, and a few others. Then, of course, the senior White House aide. Then you have sub-cabinet officials, and sometimes these people who don't get something at the top, they kind of filter down through. Then you have ambassadorships. You have an A-list of ambassadorships. France, the United Kingdom, and a few others. It's people who give a lot of money, and some of those people want to be ambassadors. That's the way it works. Below that, you have a B-list of ambassadors. You may get sent to Malta, or Barbados, or New Zealand, or the Seychelles, or whatever. If you don't get an A-list appointment, then they will offer you perhaps a B-list appointment. And then there are hundreds of boards and commissions. Everything from Amtrak and St. Lawrence Seaway Commission and so on. And so they have all of these things to head out after an election. And the competition is fierce for these. And the people who have donated a lot of money or who have worked in a campaign, they want some of this stuff. And so you have the pressure of not just filling jobs that are going to help you govern, but also taking care of the demands of a lot of people who feel like they were investing in your campaign. Then you have the people, the positions that are really going to do the work. As I said, these top agency officials, and you have the other agencies that might be considered secondary below the top 4 or 5, but they're still absolutely critical. We have deputy secretaries who run these agencies for the secretary. And you have about 3,000 what is known as Schedule C appointees. And these people tend to be people who work in your campaign. They tend to be, friends and members of Congress that supported you, and governors and so on. And there's a lot of pressure to hire these folks, especially after a campaign, because a lot of them have been working for absolutely nothing during the course of the campaign, and they want a job. And a lot of these jobs are they do important work, but not serious policy work. All of these people above this line have to be confirmed by the Senate. That's a whole other round of financial disclosures, investigations, and sometimes this can take months or even years before you get your team in place. So all this comes out of this transition plan. As I said, you have over 3,000 political appointees. Maybe as many as 4. It's hard to figure out which ones are which. And then you have, but a lot of them actually have to go through the Senate. It's a big government. And certainly Donald Trump is experiencing now the burden of having to figure out how you're going to fill these positions. So you have your people in place that can help you execute your vision and your agenda. Everyone has a Christmas card. This is kind of a joke, but it's true. You have a big Christmas card list, and you make sure everyone gets a Christmas card. So a lot of those people who are waiting for some appointment, or waiting to be selected ambassador to Croatia, they'll get a Christmas card. It's a way to kind of say, okay, we haven't forgotten. And interestingly enough, throughout a presidency, people want to get that Christmas card. When I was working in the White House, I'll never forget that around Christmas time, around the 10th to 15th of December, I would start getting calls from all over the country. People saying, there's a Christmas card going out there. I'm on the list, aren't I? Come on, get a lot of it. But these little things matter. You need to be taking advice from the people who have done this before, people who have served in the White House or in the administration before, even if they're the other party, even if they're people who oppose you. The best resource you have is that body of people who are doing those jobs or have done them in the past. And to a certain extent, you have to swallow your own hubris of thinking, well, we're smart, we've won, those guys lost, we don't need to pay any attention to them. Every incoming White House makes this mistake. I'm thinking, we know best how to do this. We don't have to listen to someone who was there before or someone who was in the administration of the president who lost. It's a big mistake. You should be honoring your campaign agenda. You really should think you should. You're going to build a wall. Are you going to be able to make Mexico pay for it? You've got to think about how to do this stuff. If you're not going to do it, how are you going to tell your supporters that you're not? You're going to eliminate all the climate change regulation. And are you going to do those things that stimulate the use of coal? How are you going to do this? Repeal Obamacare. The favorite term they were using now is to drain the Washington swamp. Well, you know, maybe that's a notable goal. Trump is already using a lot of people who swim in the swamp to put his government together. He's talking about anti-lobbyist restrictions, which sounds good. Obama did the same thing. But it takes a lot of people off the table who can help you govern. My own view is that way too much is made of this idea of lobbyists having an undue influence on the administration. And how's he going to deport 11 million immigrants? You've got to think these things through and figure out what they're going to do, and especially to not make the mistake during this transition period of making announcements about these things prematurely. Because you're not in office yet. You can't do any of this stuff. You send signals, but you can't do it yet. You want to keep your powder dry. In '92, after the election, between the election and taking office, President Clinton, or President-elect Clinton, rather than taking a break, taking a vacation, relaxing, coming down from the intensity of the campaign, he kept campaigning with an economic summit and so on. And he began to talk about things that sort of got him in trouble. One issue was the days in the military issue, which he spoke about unnecessarily. Probably the best thing that a president-elect can do is to say very little during the course of that transition. Do those things the right thing you need to do. Send the messages, but take a break. And we're already seeing Obamacare and some other things, NATO, that Trump is already having to back off some of these things. Because governing is not campaigning. You've got to negotiate a role for your vice president. Every vice presidential candidate, when they're being interviewed by the presumptive nominee, comes away thinking, I'm going to be a real partner in governing. President Trump is going to make me a real partner. I'm going to get this or that, or fill in the blank, whether it's Obama and Biden. Certainly in the case of Clinton and Gore, we went into that process with a concrete understanding of how the relationship between Gore and Clinton would operate, Gore's staff and Clinton's staff, and it was helpful in getting started. But the tensions come very quickly after you take office, because the priority is the president's time, the president's objectives. It's not the vice president's time objectives and what he wants to do. So you have to juggle that. And even in the best of relationships, there are tensions. So he's got to make sure that Pence is happy. So during that period, you have to create a role for the first lady. We're now into the period where first ladies are more visible. We usually have projects that are involved in. Some of the past first ladies they come from backgrounds in school teachers and so on. In the case of George Clinton, became Secretary of State, certainly Eleanor Roosevelt and others. We have a different kind of first lady coming to office. She will be an unusual first lady, and we hope she serves. She will. She'll serve with grace, and be an important presence in the White House. Certainly, the most unusual first lady we've ever had. You have to plan your inauguration. You got to raise $200 million to celebrate your inauguration. All these people come to town, all your supporters and voters and so on, they want to come to town and enjoy it. They want to celebrate, and you have to do that. It's private money. So you've got to put on a big party, a big show. And that takes a lot of work. A whole new organization has to come together right now to begin planning Donald Trump's inauguration. And you've got to write a great inauguration speech. I mean, it is arguably the biggest moment in a politician's life. It's the speech most remembered, or at least anticipated, for incoming president. So you want a great speech. You want to get John Meacham to write that speech. Or you want to get celebrated writers to weigh in on this. And in the end, that's going to set a tone for what kind of president you're going to be, because the whole world watches this. And we all remember some of the great times from inauguration speeches, and we've forgotten a lot of others. You want it to come off with class, grace, and excitement. So who's going to run the Trump administration? We heard this morning that the leading contender for Secretary of State is former Mayor Rudy Giuliani. I tried to find a more flattering picture of this picture. But in any event, apparently Giuliani wants to be Secretary of State, but you can't make Newt Gingrich all that happen. He was the front runner. The interior, that Dynamo Sarah is high on the list. Real baby drill. No other comments necessary. The environmental protection team is being led by a man named Myron Neel. Myron Neel, and the Environmental Protection Agency is full of scientists and people who execute regulations that are ordered by the Congress, by the way, to protect our environment. Everything from clean air and clean water to pesticides to any number of things. It's a big agency and they've got an important agenda. And up until recently, fairly recently, it was considered sort of a non-partisan enterprise. The Republican presidents that helped lead the way. Richard Nixon signed the Clean Air Act. Teddy Roosevelt was one of the great environmentalists or conservationists of all time. So Republicans have taken the lead in making sure that environmental protection is an important issue. Donald Trump has tapped this man, Myron Neel, who works for something called the Competitive Enterprise Institute. He's not a scientist, he's an economist, and his principal objective, it's funded by the Koch brothers, is to push back on any idea that climate change is a real problem. So, Attorney General, the leading candidate right now is Alabama Senator Jeff Sessions.
No.
The Bridgegate still hangs over him, and so we may just see him debate into the district. Education or Health and Human Services. Ben Carson was a loyal supporter and conservative for Donald Trump. A man with an extraordinary story, surgeon, a man of deep faith, and he is almost certainly ended up in a major position in the Department of Education or Health and Human Services. The family, more so than any other incoming president that I certainly can remember, the family will have a critical role in, if nothing else, helping Donald Trump get his administration started. Although they've already said that the family's going to be running his private company. There's talk of giving them top secret security clearances. I don't know how the company is going to work with it. There are other transitions that take place that we don't hear about talk about as much. The congressional committees and Congress, there's a lot of turnover as a result of people who are retired and lost elections, committees change, and so on. So there's a transition going on there as well. And you'll see many people coming out of congressional committees and Republican congressional offices and Senate offices that will go into the Trump administration. So there'll be turnover there. And that's another sort of transition. As well as, obviously, the 3,000 to 4,000 Obama appointees, almost all of them not. They're going to be, they'll leave and they'll go do other things. So we have that sort of transition. And then, of course, there's the lobbyists. Lobbyists always have a bad name in these processes. They're always beaten up on by every candidate, certainly the president. But they're there, and they will always be there, and they will always be influential. But they're not as influential as many as you're led to believe. They tend to gravitate toward people they think are winning. They tend to defeat the process where they think they can get some advantage. But at least in respect to the presidency and the federal government, they're not so important. They function, many of them, like lawyers making the case for clients. And the lobbyist that is usually the lobbyist that is pushing something you don't like. But if you have a lobbyist that's promoting your issue, your policy, let's say with Planned Parenthood or access to guns, you love those people. They're your advocates. So if a good lobbyist, you're an advocate, and everybody else is a bad lobbyist. I think much is too much is made of that. But you hear a lot about it. And in the end, if you're not happy, the 2020 campaign is already underway. This is just a visual of probably 20 Democrats who are already being talked about to run in 2020. Some of them will, a lot of them won't. Now, a lot of these are, Bernie Sanders is almost certainly not going to win, and Hillary Clinton is not going to win. But, well, I say that. But they're already trying to position themselves. There are a lot of Democrats that are already out there courting donors. They're trying to line up speaking engagements around the country. If they're sort of a backwater member of Congress, they're trying to get noticed. And you'll hear more and more about that. There were a lot of Republicans last Tuesday morning who thought they were going to be doing this now. You can bet Marco Rubio and Ted Cruz and a bunch of those folks, they weren't all that excited about Donald Trump winning. They were fighting at the bit to run in 2020. But they're going to have to kind of take a back seat now, assuming Trump makes it through. So we do have the 2020 campaign already underway. But wait. December 19th, the Electoral College meets. If 36 or 37 electors decide, no, we don't want Donald Trump as president, then they could flip this election. Not likely to happen. Far-fetched. Someone should write a novel. Did you read my novel, The Electors? A gripping story of a president election that's stolen or conspiracy by an over-the-hill Republican president. Get it on Amazon. The concept of faithless electors, though, is fascinating because in these 21 states, and some would argue all 50 states, the electors that you elected, those who voted, you voted for electors, they're not bound, really. I mean, a lot of them, the states believe they're bound, but at least 21 of those states, they can switch their vote perfectly legally. The states, some of the states can make changes if they think an elector is going to switch. They have 6 days before the Electoral College meets to replace an elector that they think will become faithless. But other than that, the Constitution is pretty clear on this. And there's a lot of interesting literature about this, a lot of history about the Electoral College. And there's been a movement underway for some time to try to abolish or undermine the Electoral College. It's not likely to happen because if through a constitutional amendment, it's extremely difficult to ratify it, and it would take states that benefit from the Electoral College, smaller rural states, to agree to basically give up some of their power in this process. So it's probably not going to happen. There's a movement underway to try to get each state to reallocate or change the way they allocate their electors so it would represent directly the population in their states. In most of the states, there are 10 states that have already done this, but it's all conditioned on all 50 states doing it. A few years ago, the Republicans tried to get Colorado to do this, thinking it would give them an edge. And they would. If the Republicans can get a number of blue states to change the way they allocate elections, they would have a lock on presidential elections for the foreseeable future. So it would be very hard to do, and I think the Electoral College is with us for a long time. Anyway, that's an overview of how this transition is going, a little bit about the history of transitions. It's a critical time. If you make mistakes during this period, it can seriously affect and compromise your ability to govern once you become president. So it's worth paying attention to. It's worth reading those stories about who Trump is appointing to these jobs. And then the second story will be how they are dealt with when they're up for confirmation. One last thought. A few years ago, the Democrats decided that they wanted to be able to push through Obama's appointments without having to deal with the potential of a filibuster. They were successful in doing that, which means by majority vote, the Senate can confirm Obama's appointees. And that is going to come back to home because there will be an effort to try to stop some of Trump's appointments. Certainly Myron Neel, if he's appointed head of the EPA, there will be an effort to do that. But the Democrats in the Senate now, their hands are tied to a certain extent in doing that. So we have a situation now, a perfect storm for Donald Trump and the Republicans to govern the way they want to govern. And we'll all hold them accountable. So that's it for today. Thank you. Any questions or observations? Yes.
You mentioned that the first major transition effort was the budget in 2016. Do you think that that is an instance that happened so soon after the passing of your administration,
The question is, was Kennedy's pre-election planning the result of the inauguration date being moved forward? It actually happened after FDR, because when FDR was elected, the inauguration was in March. And so there was just a lot of time in there to have a late I don't think that had much of an impact. I think that was more the case of Kennedy having a group of advisors who really spent the time with many of them at Harvard, where he had a lot of relationships, of course. I think he just had some thoughtful, visionary people whose judgment he trusted. And I think that had a lot to do with it. And what Kennedy did during that period has really been carried forward by most everyone who's tried to do pre-election. Yeah, here.
How much institutional knowledge do the exiting, like for instance now, the Obama staffers carry with them? Are they obligated, or is there sort of convention to turn a lot of that over? Is it kept somewhere? Like you could imagine, or I could at least now, a resistant Obama staff, regardless of what sort of public image there is, to handing over a huge trove of information to an incoming Trump staff.
Very good question. Everybody hear this. What is the obligation to transfer the institutional knowledge you have to the incoming administration, especially where there's not a lot of warm feeling here? The president, the outgoing president, sets the tone with his administration to cooperate with the incoming administration. So they're all expected to do that. But obviously there's cooperation and there's cooperation. And you're sort of obliged to tell the incoming transition teams what you're doing and what they can expect, what's going to happen next. But you don't have to go any further than that. So it'll be office by office, individual to individual. Now, at the highest levels, and certainly in the national security areas, there is not only an obligation, but the Congress expects this in a kind of almost nonpartisan way. You're expected to cooperate, and the smart incoming administration will keep on some people, because traditionally a lot of foreign policy and national security people are nonpartisan. There used to be a kind of an understanding before Reagan that the incoming administration would keep some senior person from the State Department in place for a year or so to provide that institution. Reagan blew that up, and his incoming administration did not honor that. You may see some holdovers, particularly in the national security areas, in defense or possibly state, and that's the way it should work. But even if you have that, you can be told how something is going to happen or what's been going on. But until you're doing it yourself, until you're sitting there every day dealing with a decision that in many cases is life or death, or much less involves billions of dollars, until you're doing that, you face that, you can't really understand or take that information on in a way that says, oh, okay, well now I can do this. There's really, particularly in the White House, by the way, there's no real textbook. There's no plan that says, okay, well you're going to do A, B, and C, because it all reflects the personality and plans of the president at that point. And somebody back here,
Yeah, do you think that the protests and then also like Donald Trump is trying to elect his cabinet will have an effect on how the Electoral College will vote? Like, I know typically they don't vote against what like the president-elect has gone for, but do you think that because there's so much like frustration that will make a difference this time?
Will the protests have any effect on how the Electoral College members vote? Probably not. And in a way, it should. Anyone who feels like they've lost, and particularly in an election like that, like this, where the stakes were so high and people were felt so battered and traumatized by the outcome, it's assumed they're going to be protesting. There's really almost no way that the electors could be convinced to switch unless there's some catastrophe in the meantime. I mean, I can envision a few. My brother, but probably not. Now, the one thing about these protests, they could be the seed for a new movement, particularly of younger voters, to get involved. Turnout is not great this time among younger voters. Big fall off from the first Obama election. And generally, it's not the political force that it probably should be. Because there's no question that the policies that are being discussed here or being debated have the greatest impact on young voters. So there ought to be more involved. I mean, when I was your age, the Vietnam War was underway. And that generated a great deal of youthful involvement in the political process. People worried not only about what was happening to soldiers in the country being in Vietnam, but their own well-being. Well, are they going to be sent to this war? So that focused the attention. Maybe if Trump overreaches, whether it's on the environment or national security issues, maybe that will do that. And if you're a Trump supporter, then you'd want Trump to be successful, not just for those people who are passionate about him being elected, but for the whole country. And if you oppose Trump's election, if you oppose what he's going to be doing, then it's your interest to try to get other people to office. Unlike a parliamentary system where after 2 years, you could throw somebody out of office if they weren't cutting him. He's got 4 years. And unless he's impeached, then he's going to be there. He's going to be having an impact on your life. Over here. I didn't get the last part. How long will it take to turn over? I'm sorry, I still didn't hear the last part.
How long will it take about 15 minutes to Obama's current
his appointments or his executive order? Oh, ambassadors, I'm sorry. Ambassadors are appointed for 3 years at a time. Many of them will resign pretty quickly. because they want to get on with their lives. But some of them will stay there through the duration of their term. It will take Trump a while to get people nominated. Those usually, unless they're the hot spots, Afghanistan, Middle East, and so on, they're not priority appointments when you're pushed to do them overnight. So there's not the same kind of pressure. So it could be within 6 months or so, but a lot of Obama's ambassadors, political appointments, will resign. Those who are foreign service, who are professional foreign service ambassadors, they'll probably stay. I mean, until a new ambassador is nominated, that could take a year. Yeah, thank you.
To what effect, if any, does the idea of having a mandate, just like winning the popular vote in any electoral college, play into this?
The question is, what is the effect of a mandate? Well, we don't have one this time. We haven't had a mandate since, what, Reagan? Maybe? We'd have to go back, maybe even Johnson in '64. You know, a mandate is what's in your head. You think you've got a mandate just because you want. George W. Bush, after the 2000 election, I think was even quoted saying, we have a mandate now. Even though he lost the popular vote by 500,000 votes, and Oregon's by a hair, by 500 votes in Florida. So, you know, in his mind, he had a mandate, and in a way, you do. I mean, what do you call the candidate who wins by one vote nationwide?
President.
Mr. President. So, you know, you do have a mandate in the sense that you're going to govern. It's your government to run. A mandate is sort of a nonsensical term. I mean, you have a mandate not by virtue of the popular vote necessarily, or the electoral college. I mean, Obama did not win a huge popular vote margin. He won a whole lot of electoral votes, and nobody pays any attention to that later on. You would have a mandate if you squeaked into office the majority party in the House and the Senate of your party. You had Hillary Clinton won a huge win and won the Senate and the House, that would be a mandate. And she could have argued that, but you know, what would that have done? The people who are in the opposition party, they don't have that's a mandate. They're there to be the opposition party. So it really doesn't mean a lot. Yeah.
So maybe just me and my conservative bubble, but I've been very surprised by some of the reactions that we've seen around the country to Trump's election. And what I want to know is one, what exactly is causing this? Would it have been the same almost from the right if Hillary had won? And two, how does Trump pass this stuff to unite the country and govern as effectively as he can?
Well, that's a thoughtful question. I would ask you, if Hillary won by a narrow margin, do you think that the alt-right or the Trump supporters would have rioted and embraced it?
I don't think we've been on the same system.
Well, I don't know. The thing that scared me is a lot of those folks have drugs. But if your question is thoughtful, and particularly the second part of it, what can Trump do to unite the country? I think, even though I wasn't born, I'm grossly unqualified, he's won, and he has a huge opportunity because he is something of an empty vessel, and people aren't expecting much from him. He has a huge opportunity. He could do what's sometimes referred to as a Nixon to China. He can sort of buck his own party and say, no, we're going to do something that's for the good of the country. And no, we are going to take care of these people who are involved. We're not going to allow violence against gays and Mexicans. We're going to do the right thing for everybody. Yes, we're going to cut taxes, and yes, we're going to enforce our immigration laws, and we are going to fix Obamacare. We're going to do those things, but we're going to do it in a way that honors and respects all Americans. He did that. He'd go a long way because he's got nowhere to go but us for all the people in the country who didn't support him. So the second part of your question, I think, is really a critical question facing his administration right now. And all the stuff about appointments, that will go by the wayside when they have to start actually governing and doing things. If, on the other hand, he pushes for legislation to physically deport, families. If he appoints Supreme Court Justice, I'm not sure this is important to you, but if he appoints justices who are so hard to the right and that it's not a moderate position. If he doesn't govern as a moderate, then it won't unite. There'll be a constant pushback and an outlet. But I think he has a great opportunity. Yeah, I'm curious.
Slightly off topic, but I know you work for Howard Dean's campaign, and Howard Dean announced his candidacy for the DNC chair. I'm just wondering from your perspective, would you rather see the DNC going a veterans direction like Howard Dean, or a newer, fresher perspective like Keith Ellison?
Yes, well, I did work for Howard Dean, but as the old joke was said, it knows that bed was on fire when I got into it. The campaign was going down in flames, and Howard called me and asked me to sort of manage the end of it. I think Howard Dean would be a great chairman. He was a great chairman when he was chairman of the party before. He had a 50-state strategy. He invigorated an awful lot of state party organizations. I don't think he'll be as selective, but he would be terrific. I have no idea who they will pick or who will be great. I do agree with him to this point. If you simply make this a general activity of the sitting member of Congress, it makes no sense. I mean, one thing the Republicans did right was the previous and past chairman had been full-time chairman focused on the party and getting Republicans elected. If you're the chairman of the Democratic Party and you're also a member of Congress, you're serving too many different constituents.
Well, we have an exam to hand out, so we're going to